Greetings, everyone. We're going to wait a couple more minutes for people to allow a little bit more time to join in, and then we'll be starting soon.
Yeah.
Greetings to all that are joining us from all over the world for our third ILTR webinar for this year. I'm Dishani Hewitana, International Management Officer at the International Management Office of ILTR Network. And before we dive into our talks today, I have a couple of announcements and announcements to make. And I'm going to share some links with you in the chat that would help you to connect with us even more through our newsletter, and also to join for early career researchers to join our early career researchers network. Please check those links out. I have also posted the link to our YouTube channel. This webinar and all our past webinars are recorded and uploaded into our YouTube channel. Please check them out as well. In today's webinar, we have 3 speakers joining us from SAEON network, and I will introduce the first speaker, and then each speaker will introduce the next speaker, and we will have time reserved for questions towards the end of all 3 talks. And we're going to begin our webinar now.
Dashani?
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Before we begin, I also want to invite our ILTR Chair, Dr. Tiffany Troxler, to say a few words before we begin the webinar.
Hey, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for joining today. My name is Tiffany Troxler. I'm the chair of the executive committee of the International Long-Term Ecological Research Network, based at Florida International University in Miami, Florida, USA, and co-PI of our Florida Coastal Everglades Long-Term Ecological Research Program.
Ja, jag ska vara här 3.
Within the USLTER. So I just wanted to thank you all for participating today. A special thanks to our speakers. I wanted to bring to your attention that our annual coordinating committee meeting, which is open to all within our ILTR community, will be held on November 4th at noon UTC. And here we'll hear updates from our committees and as well as our regional networks, and open for some discussion there. So please consider joining then. And then immediately following that, we're going to feature the early career researcher winners of the of our virtual field tour competition. So we have some short videos that have won that competition, and it's a fantastic way to learn about some of the great work that's going on around the ILTR network and hear from our early career researchers. And then the following day, November 5th, is our governing board meeting, and this is also at noon UTC, and we invite the ILTR community to participate as observers. And in the governing board meeting, we will be voting for new positions. So we have a new position of co-chair open. So the co-chair serves for a year and then takes on the role of the chair of the ILTR Executive Committee. We also have open positions for the secretary and our auditors. So please consider running for one of these leadership positions and submit your nominations. We're just looking for a short statement of interest and a CV, and we will post the email for Deshani where you can submit those materials. One last update, we are currently planning our 4th Open Science meeting. And this is going to be held in Bariloche, Argentina, likely in spring of 2027. And it's going to be co-hosted by the University of Buenos Aires, the Ecological Society of Argentina, and some of our other Argentinian partners. Our program committee is currently has launched and is currently meeting. And this is a really fantastic opportunity to meet and discuss and have the opportunity to learn from our collaborators across the global LTR community. So in case you're not currently on the newsletter, which is where we are able to disseminate a lot of these updates, I'm going to post that in the chat where you can subscribe to that newsletter. And that's also a place where you can share information from your own LTR programs with Deshani, and she can feature that in the newsletter. So thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to a fantastic webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. We almost missed that information. I skipped that. Thank you so much. So let's begin our webinar today. We have 3 speakers joining us from SAEON network. Our first speaker is going to be Gregor Feig, and then we have Dr. Michelle Tusher, and then we have Vanet Collitz joining us as our 3rd speaker today. To begin with, we're going to invite the first speaker, Gregor Feig. He's a biogeochemist working in the land as an atmospheric aspect for SAEON, and also he manages F10 infrastructure system in SAEON. He's going to be talking to us about expanded freshwater and terrestrial environmental observation network, a landscape scale environmental research infrastructure in South Africa. That's it. The floor is yours, Gregor. Please continue.
Hi, thank you, Deshani, and thank you for attending, colleagues. My name is Gregor Feig. I manage the FTR network, which is hosted by SAEON, which is the South African Environmental Observation Network. And we've got 3 speakers from SAEON talking about some of the activities that we've got in South Africa today. So just as a little bit of introduction, the South African Environmental Observation Network is part of the National Research Foundation. This is our science funding agency, and is funded through our ministry, the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation. And we have a vision of producing world-class environmental research platforms for sustainable society. So we're looking at long-term research infrastructure platforms in the South African space, and integrate across a lot of different kind of thematic areas, and we have a footprint across the broader South African system. And within SAEON itself, we operate 7 different nodes. 4 of them are terrestrial nodes, and you'll hear speakers Michelle and Vainant, who are coming from the grasslands and the Arid systems nodes. And then also activities in the shallow coastal systems, and eventually out into the deeper marine systems. And we really are a dedicated institution for enabling long-term in situ global change research, and it's the broader scale of global change research. Now, SAEON has been operating for more than 20 years, and recently it has been tasked with hosting a number of research infrastructure programs through a different funding mechanism within the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation. And these include FTION, which I'm going to be talking about through the rest of this presentation, then the Shallow Marine and Coastal Research Infrastructure, and the South African Polar Research Infrastructure. And they all do long-term trans or multidisciplinary projects and roll out across this network. They operate as a platform to train students and develop technical skills. And of course, being a research infrastructure and being hosted within SAEON, which is part of the science landscape in South Africa, a lot of the aim of what it is that we're trying to do is to collaborate with other research initiatives and develop projects and opportunities for joint projects with both national and international partners. So please bear that in mind as we go through this presentation and then also the next two going forward. So FTION itself, we are in the process of rolling out 6 landscape scale research infrastructure sites. And these basically cover the range of different biomes and social systems within South Africa. So going from, I'm not sure if you can see my pointer, in the top right corner is the Lowveld landscape, linking in between the Kruger long-term conservation activities in the Kruger National Park and the adjacent communal land systems, which are developing and are quite heavily populated. Right on the coast is the Maputoland area, and this is one of the more tropical regions in South Africa. It's a tropical grassland system, and this is the FTION infrastructure is expanding out of work that had already occurred with the grasslands node, and I think Michelle might talk about that a little bit going forward as well. And then moving inland, in the boundary between South Africa and Lesotho and 2 of the South African provinces, we have the Northern Drakensberg landscape, and this is in the upper reaches of one of the larger rivers in South Africa, and right at the catchment of 3 of the major rivers that we have in South Africa. It's a landscape that has a transition between different grassland systems, grass and savanna systems, and then it also has different land uses, including subsistence agriculture, conservation, and commercial agricultural systems. Moving inland from there, there's a site around the town of Kimberley, where there's a natural transition between grassland, arid savanna systems, and Namakuru systems. So you've got this transition within a fairly small space between a number of particularly important biomes in South African space. Finally, down to Cape Town, we're operating, developing some of the infrastructure around the city of Cape Town, particularly to the east and going up into the mountains. So please just bear this in context as we, as I talk about the landscapes which are under development. We also have a final landscape which has not had much development in it at the moment, and that's in the Garden Route. And this is marked by some very strong altitudinal and land use gradients in a fairly short area of time, or spatial extent. And we'll be getting into development of that hopefully in the next year or so. These are 6 landscapes, and we're trying to develop standardized observation systems across all of them. All of them have a human transformed ecosystem, and we include both the terrestrial components and the aquatic components. And the idea is really to have these core sites with a network of subsidiary sites to be surveyed at various intervals. And of course, a lot of this will involve engagement with the other nodes within SAEON itself. So the number of research infrastructure platforms or platforms that we're operating in. The first is around biogeochemistry, which is my own background. In the SAEON space, we're operating a number of flux tower systems. There are 8 of them within the SAEON stable. And these have been operating, some of them which we include since 2000, so 25 years worth of data at this Skukuza site, which has been done in conjunction with the CSIR, and that's in the Kruger National Park. But then a number of new sites have been developed. These measure the exchange of carbon dioxide and water vapor, and a whole lot of other measurements as well, including meteorology and things like soil moisture and soil temperature, and act as a site for including other measurements and expanding the kind of footprint and the understanding of what's going on at an ecosystem level. Linked to this, we're rolling out a network of phenology sensors. There's LAI sensors, which are currently under procurement and are getting mounted, will be getting mounted onto the flux towers. We have procured septometers to look at vegetation. There've been repeat photography observations happening at all of these landscapes, so you can see graphically changes over time. And then very recently, we've also procured a whole lot of soil respiration instruments. These are GasMet GT5000s, so that we can start partitioning the carbon exchange and the carbon flux within the footprint of these towers. You can start seeing where we're getting the net ecosystem exchange, where there is what the respiration signal might be, and it includes some other greenhouse gases which we are not operating. At the moment, with SAEON operating 8 of the eddy covariance systems in South Africa. Just to put it into context, there's a total of 21 systems across the whole continent, and this is compared to something like 800 across North America. So there is a desperate need for these kind of observations and the downstream effects that we get of these data sets. Within each of these landscapes, and using these as a hard infrastructure point, we're doing things like vegetation monitoring, so looking at the direct areas around the flux towers themselves, and trying to link this using the similar methodologies to some of the broader continental scale networks, such as the CSO. And for example, this is the site at the SAEON in the northern Drakensberg, where we've got our tower. We've done the vegetation plotting around that, both for the larger tree species and also the herbaceous species, and this feeds into the CSO protocols, which gives us quite a lot of data across the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. For example, in that particular site, more than 1,000 trees were sampled. These were tagged, and damage and use and things. And we'll be going back to resample these on a regular basis. In the Benfontein site, which is in Kimberley, these have already been resampled at least twice going forward. We also have a project with a student at the moment, trying to develop some skills around soundscapes and acoustic sampling, and how useful this might be in the context of a long-term research infrastructure, because it's fairly low effort to deploy these and keep them going, and you can get a lot of data over a long period of time, and then use machine learning and various other processes to identify what the species are in that area. And we've had this deployed in fairly high density across the northern Drakensberg landscape, but that project is now reaching an end, and these will be distributed across the other landscapes within the SAEON network. We've rolling out a network of meteorological instrumentation within each of these landscapes. This gives us good data around what the climate is doing, what the weather is doing, what those might be as drivers of ecosystem or social change, and trying to co-locate these within other sites where there might be some activity happening. So, for example, this is in a community where there's some agricultural activities happening, and that's been the site of projects, and I think Michelle will be speaking about that. And then the other picture on the right is at a site which has got research happening through the Medical Research Council, looking at long-term population demographics. So basically what we're doing is trying to add the environmental dimensions to this. This data is available. You can access the live data coming from the website, and also you can access the data itself, and I'll show that in a couple of minutes. One of the aspects that we're looking at is some of this atmospheric chemistry. So what is happening in terms of things like rainfall? What is the rain chemistry looking like? And instrumentation is getting deployed into the landscapes around that. In terms of wet deposition, so what's in the rainfall, what is coming through from the aerosol fractions, and some of the atmospheric pollutants. Trying to get this integrated system that's coming through. And this also forms part of a separately funded research study looking at, for example, nitrogen via geochemistry in South Africa. And then in conjunction with one of the other research infrastructures, BioGrip, looking at the isotopic signals of and sources of those nitrogen species that we are capturing across this network. There's developments around hydrology, looking at how much water, where it is, how it moves, what the water quality is, with deployments within some of the FTON landscapes going forward. And then finally, trying to develop a system around social ecological systems research, partly in terms of understanding what the drivers are of land use change, what the kind of resources that are available within these communities, but then also using this as a platform for community engagement and going forward. The data is operated under FAIR principles. It's findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Data is available on the long-term observations monitor that we've got here, and our real-time data is available on this observations monitor site, which you can see the web address over there. And we've got something like 192 million observations at this point, and it is all freely available. You basically just need to sign in. It gives you a DOI. Please remember to cite it, and you can access that data. And this is a platform that is growing. So really, just in conclusion, we're developing an integrated transdisciplinary approach, deploying instrumentation in a harmonized kind of way at a landscape scale, so that we can look at research across the scales of Southern Africa at various scales, and also within and between landscapes. There are implicit linkages between meteorology, atmospheric processes, hydrology, biogeochemical processes, and these, of course, are important for things like remote sensing and modeling studies. We're trying to include a human and biodiversity components, looking at things like provision of ecosystem services and what that might look like. And we are available as a research platform to train students, develop technical skills, and conduct further research, and looking for collaboration with other national and international partners and other initiatives. And just as I close, I will leave some of our contacts. There's the SAEON web address. There's a link to our weather stations. The live weather data is on the Terrestrial Observations Monitor that gets updated on a daily basis. And we have our open data platform. And I think, thank you very much. With that, I should probably introduce our next speaker. That's Dr. Michelle Tischer from the SAEON Grasslands, Forest and Wetlands node. Michelle is a hydrologist. Sorry, let me just stop sharing. I think she'll be talking about some of the catchments in more detail in which we're operating. So thank you, Michelle.
Thanks very much, Gregor. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to be talking about the Cathedral Peak research catchments, which fall within the Northern Drakensberg FTON landscape that Gregor introduced. Sorry. So South Africa, just sort of as a bit of a background, South Africa is a very arid country, well, semi-arid country, and our rainfall is highly variable. So we've got very high rainfall on the east coast and very low rainfall on the west coast. And on average, only about 9% of our rainfall makes it into our river systems, because the majority of the rainfall is partitioned to evapotranspiration. And what this means is that any change in land cover or land use, or how we manage our land cover, impacts on the water that is supplied from the land cover, from that area. So if you look at it in terms of the hydrological cycle with the evapotranspiration, inception, infiltration, stream flow, if you've got a nice grassland, you've got your evapotranspiration component. Some of that rainfall is the incoming rainfall, some of it is intercepted, some of it infiltrates from the soil water content, some of it is transpired, and you also have a loss through soil water evaporation. And then you have a balance which comes out as stream flow. If, for example, that grass burns, you're going to change, there's going to be zero interception, your infiltration will be next to nothing, and your evapotranspiration will change at the same time. If it goes towards a woody cover, you will see more evapotranspiration, more interception, and a change in your stream flow component. So in South Africa, a large portion of our water comes from our beautiful Afro-Montane grasslands in the Drakensberg escarpment. So these are fire climax grasslands. There are need fire to maintain them in good condition. On average, they should be burnt about every second year, and this maintains them in this very good condition. And these are crucial for water supply. But what we are seeing with increased CO2 levels is that they are being threatened by woody encroachments. And there's also pressure globally. So for example, these types of maps which come out, which classify grasslands as degraded forests. And there's increasing pressure for reforestation programs for carbon sequestration. But thankfully, we have a set of catchments in the Drakensberg where we can look at woody encroachment over time and its influence on water and other aspects to get a better picture and to be able to have evidence of what is going on. These catchments are the Cathedral Peak Research catchments. They're situated in the Maluti Drakensberg. They have an average altitude of about 2,000 meters. They fall in the summer rainfall region, and on average, it's about 1,400 millimeters of rainfall per year. The catchments were established in 1945, and they were established to look at the influence of commercial trees on water resources. When the catchments were put in place, it was a paired catchment design. So what that means is that you'd have one catchment which would be held constant, and the land cover in a neighboring catchment would be changed, and you'd be able to compare the two to see what the influence of that treatment was. There was a very careful process around the design of the hydrological equipment that went in and the climate monitoring that went in. And these catchments over time had a very big influence on South African hydrology and on our National Water Act. So what that influence was that one of the catchment 2 and catchment 3 were planted to commercial pine species. And within 6 years, they noticed the decrease in the mean annual stream flow from these catchments. Particularly in the dry winter months, the stream flow dropped remarkably. Monitoring continued in the catchments until 1995, but during that time period, there was a lot of impact on water policy, and we had the afforestation permit system, and in our National Water Act, the results from these catchments are used to govern how forestry is managed in South Africa. Fast forward in time, 1995, the catchments were shut down, no monitoring continued. But thankfully, the land custodians continued the burning regimes, and they maintained the basic catchment treatments that were in place. 2011, the South African Environmental Observation Network established the Grasslands Node, and the Grasslands Node looked at these catchments to re-establish monitoring here because of the long-term historical record. Today, we've got a fairly dense network of climate, hydrology, biodiversity, and carbon measurements that occur in the catchments. And we've started to already see evidence of changes in the climate. All the years that we've monitored, the mean annual temperature has been warmer than the historical mean by about 1.1 degrees Celsius. But the focus today is on what we've noticed in terms of the woody encroachment that has occurred in one of the catchments, and we can compare this to a catchment that hasn't been impacted. So catchment 6 is our benchmark catchment. It's a pristine grassland catchment. It's fire adapted Themeda triandra. It's in near natural condition. It's biennially burnt, and in winter those grasses senesce. So the top figure is sort of summer, the bottom figure is just after a burn in spring. And you can see that the neighbouring catchment is still brown from the senescence. The second catchment is catchment, what we term catchment 9. This catchment, fire has been excluded from the catchment since 1956. Although there have been a few arson burns, the management burns have been excluded and the arson burns have not been that frequent. Over time, this catchment has transitioned to a woody species called Leucocidia, and this Leucocidia remains evergreen throughout the year. So when the grasses in the bottom figure have senesced, the Leucocidia is still green. So what we've been able to do is using eddy covariance and surface renewal for evapotranspiration, soil moisture sensors, stream flow, infiltration and measurements, climatology measurements, stem flow and through-fall measurements, we've been able to look at all the components of the hydrological cycle and compare how these two vegetations are influencing water supply. Climatically, they're very similar, the two catchments, and I'll just get into some of the results. So what we picked up is the woody vegetation, about 29% of the rainfall is being intercepted by the Leucocidia. The bark has a lot of lichen growing on it. It's quite papery, and it holds a lot of the rainfall in the vegetation. In terms of evapotranspiration, so the top graph here is the moving average, a 30-day moving average of ET over the two different vegetations. The black line is the woodies and the grey line is the grasslands. The browny coloured bars, that's showing winter, and the white is summer. So during summer, the ET from the two different land covers is actually very similar. But the big difference comes in winter. So the grasses drop right off in terms of ET in winter, but the Leucocidia continues to transpire quite actively. Just looking, the bottom graph is showing it as an accumulation over the year. It's shown from October, which is what we deem our hydrological year. Our rainfall starts sort of into October and lasts through into March. And you can see as the rainfall ends, that's where the two groupings of graphs, we've got a number of years of record, start to separate, and the grass is just about flatten off in the last half of the year, and the woody species, the black line, continues to transpire. In terms of albedo, the two catchments are quite different. You can see the grassland, the grey dots. You can see when the burning comes in, and the Leucocidia is quite consistent over time. Soil water content-wise, quite similar. And then the big difference is coming in terms of stream flow. So what we see is, if you focus on the bottom graph, the grey lines are from the grassland and the black lines are from the woody species. And this is accumulated stream flow over the year. The woody species are producing about half the stream flow of what the grassland catchment is. Looking at that in a different way, what we've done here is plotted the stream flow and the rainfall over time, as well as when the burns came with the arrows. And from that, we can derive the runoff ratio. So this is the percentage of stream flow relative to the rainfall that we get. And this is where the big value of the long-term data came through. Initially, when the burns were excluded from the catchment, the runoff ratio was quite similar between the woodies and the grasses. Now, with the catchments being the woodies being more dominant in catchment 9 and quite densely established, that runoff ratio has changed quite considerably. And there's far less runoff in terms of the rainfall coming from the woody catchment relative to the grassland. So the green ring is the grassland, and the red ring is the woody species. And you can see that decrease in the runoff ratio over time. And where this is particularly concerning is it's during the dry months that we rely on these catchments as strategic water source areas to supply the lowlands when they have no rainfall. And this comes on top. So what we've also been able to do is look at catchment 6, which has been grassland all the time, and go back to a historical study that looked at the runoff ratio in that catchment in the 1980s, with the last year being 1991. And the mean runoff ratio back then was 43% of the rainfall was converted to runoff. What we're seeing now with the more current record is that 58% of the rainfall is being converted to runoff. And this is because we're also seeing a change in the way that the rainfall is occurring. We're getting a lot more low intensity rainfall events and then very high intensity storms. And this is changing the infiltration dynamic in the catchments. So what we would have expected to see in catchment 9, if I go back, is that runoff ratio should actually be higher, like it is in catchment 6, given the changes in the climate. So this low runoff ratio is even further amplified because of the changes in the climate that have occurred. So what we can show given that we've got this long historical record, is that there's definitely a negative influence of the woodies on the water yields. But this effect, if you exclude fire from the grasslands, you're not going to see that effect immediately. It's going to be years until it becomes quite evident. And it will, at that stage, the woodies would have progressed to the form the point that they cannot be reversed. And we've got no legislation in South Africa that specifically relates to woody encroachments. And this is particularly concerning in terms of water. So the situation we exist in is that 50% of our water is produced from 9.8% of our land area. And a lot of this land area coincides with the grassland biome. So if there's a continued push in terms of afforestation and allowing and excluding fire from landscapes and a progression towards a more woody species, our water is going to become more and more constrained. And already more than 98% of our water is allocated. So what this sort of long-term record sort of shows is that we really need to consider the water, the biodiversity, and the carbon together in a nexus approach. And the value of the long-term data becomes particularly apparent when you start to look at the lags and hydrological responses. So that brings me to the end. And I'm going to hand over now to Wynand, who's from the Arid Lands node, and it's a bit of a change in topic. He's focused more on plants and ecology, so switch away from the water. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, thank you, Michelle. And thank you, ILTER, for allowing me to talk. Good day, everyone. I'm just going to talk a little bit about one of our long-term ecological research site, which is part of the ILTER network. And it's truly a gem in this area for the research that's being done. So in the 1800s, there was a lot of settlers moving through the Karoo with a lot of overgrazing happening. This town, Prince Albert, which is 30 kilometers from our site, started in the early 1800s, a lot of history. It's a very nice little town. And you could see there's a lot of old Victorian style houses in the center of town and big churches. because of the history, and it heavily relies on one small stream coming from the mountain catchment, but this relies on rainfall and snow, but this area is prone to drought, something that wasn't considered when they're putting the town or started it. But I'll delve a little bit more into that. So as you can see, the little star at the bottom left of the map there of South Africa.
Interrupt when a
I've-
little bit. When we can't see your presentation. Could you please reshare it?
Oh, sorry. Apologies, everyone.
No, that's fine.
You see it now?
It's loading.
Mm.
We can see the screen. Now if we go to the presentation mode, we can see the full screen.
Okay. Apologies, everyone. So this is just to show the town of Prince Albert, where that is situated. And you can see the old buildings and the dry landscape. So our little star here on the map shows the location of our site. It is kind of in the area where we get all year rainfall, but I would like to call it unreliable rainfall because it's very hard to predict when it's going to rain. So it's very hard to determine what's going to be happening in the landscape. And then the Karoo is one of the biggest bioregions in South Africa. Very prone to overgrazing, especially in the old days of settlers and things. It's characterized by small dwarf shrubs, usually on shallow soils, and but it survives where there's very little rain. So the area receives around 200 millimeters a year annually. Some years it's well below that, some years it's a little over. And the Karoo can be split into the succulent Karoo and Nama Karoo. The succulent Karoo, obviously, as the name implies, a lot more succulents and forbs and geophytes, whereas the Nama Karoo is slightly more woody. So just to illustrate, on the right, there's two different types of plants. These are common throughout, specifically the Nama Karoo, but also the succulent Karoo. And these plants have adapted to this harsh area where we see maximum temperatures of up to 50 degrees Celsius and up to -10 degrees in winter. So it gets extremely hot, extremely cold, but these plants have adapted to survive these harsh conditions as well as the low moisture availability. So the site itself started in the 1987. So when the site started, I was still young and cute at 3 months old. So this is quite a while ago. Now things have changed considerably. But the research has continued throughout the years in this past 38 years. And I'll get to some of it. So in 2014, a section of the farm that was used for research was fenced off and donated to the NRF, which is managed by the SAEON Arid Lands Node. So the tall fences in the back of this little video is the boundary between our property and the neighboring farm. In the past, it was used for sheep farming and cattle. Now it's mainly game. And then there's small internal fences are part of exclosure experiments. There are several exclosures set up throughout the property where we were monitoring grazing. So the exclosures would exclude herbivores. Now we have the fence line excluding major herbivores, and then we have these exclosures that exclude smaller herbivores. And on top of that, we've added more experiments over the years. So there's fertilizer treatment, there's looking at various insects in the plants like scorpions. So there's a lot being done in this small little area. We continue to do maintenance. So there's 2 research sites at the site, one with beds and a table, and the other side with some research equipment, kettle, It does have some electricity, some solar electricity, and an outhouse. Sorry, I have a new puppy. So we continue to maintain this area for researchers to come and use if they please. Now, more along the research, Gina Arena, a former intern, created this little roadmap to show some of the research. And it's really phenomenal how this little area, which is 100 hectares square, so it's not big, it's a kilometer by a kilometer. It's a very small area, but over hundreds of publications, popular articles, media, and conference presentations have come from this little site. And this is just to show the variety of research that's been done at the site. And then more along some of the botany side of things, Sue Moulton, Professor Sue Moulton, in 1987 set up a small phenology study where she looked at different tree species in different areas, so the ridge, flats, and along a certain transect, to determine how phenology changes. And she picked up some really interesting trends. And between her and the late Richard Dean, they've published several articles, which I encourage you to read. It's really interesting work. And then we used that as a baseline to start with phenology of our own that's still ongoing. It started in 2017 with the help of Sue and then the interns that were based at the site. So using 5 different species with various replicates. We have strongly reseeders, we have reseeder resprouters, we have succulent, woody, just between these 5. So we have a good variety that we monitor on a monthly basis to pick up the trends with climate. Now, this shows how the area can look. At this point in time, in 2020, it was 5 years of drought, I think, 5 or 6. And this drought continued for quite some time. Now we've seen what happens with rain, and particularly continuous good months of rain. A lot of the literature suggests that the flowering times and fruiting is seasonal. However, we were able to show that rainfall actually impacts way more than season. Whether it's winter or summer rain, if it's substantial enough, we can see quite a difference. So exactly the same area, you can see that was after those 3 months of good rain, how completely the area changed. Now, these photos were taken 3 months apart, but it should be noticed that this change can happen in 2 or 3 months. If there's sufficient rain, this happens really quickly. And that same species that were flowering here, Osteospermum, just to show it's a Asteraceae, how quickly it was directly after the flowering, after the good rainfall, it immediately starts flowering and even fruit, showing fruit on the right side to release the seeds in favorable conditions. So the site has more value. We've had plenty of interns based here. We've had some student projects. A lot of the interns have gone on to do their master's and PhD studies, especially through the help of Sue Moulton. Then we have a full weather station at the site. We also have a small weather station at the Nature Reserve, which is at Prince Albert. So these allow us to do a lot of correlations with climate. And it's useful to have these 2 fairly close by so we can always do comparisons, because sometimes the town gets more rain than at the site. Then obviously one of the main focuses is the drought and the response of the plants to the drought. So there's an ongoing drought study focused in this area, as well as other studies that are affected by the drought, such as the burn plots. You can't really see the burn plot outline on the right, but where you can see the clearly barren area, that's where fire was. So this area is not fire adapted at all and takes many decades to recover from a fire. There's also other research opportunities. So on the left, a lot of work has been done on the fairy circles, or we call them yewelkies. It's these circles that are created by termites. They bring in salts and nutrients that changes the soil biochemistry, and then in turn changes the species composition. And then on the right, these are just sort of small quadrats based off of the fence line, the grazing area. So we can see what's happening on the inside and outside, and there's also fertilizer treatment happening on these exclosure plots. I have to say that without Sue and Richard, they've been there from the start, and they've been really essential for the running of the site and continue to help and guide the SAEON staff and students. And then, as mentioned by Gregor, the one landscape that still needs to take off is based at the Garden Route area, which is just on the southern side of those mountains in the background. And both the Teeberg site, which I'm talking about, and the Wolverkraal Nature Reserve are satellite sites for this bigger landscape project. So yeah, this is our little research gem in the Karoo. It is open for researchers from anywhere. If you're interested, you are welcome to contact us. It's a great place to do some arid ecology or just to see the clear starry nights, which the Karoo is known for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reynard. That was such an amazing presentation. And thank you so much for the videos. It just gave us the closest to real virtual experience. Thank you so much. And a big thank you to all our amazing speakers. And it was so awesome to learn so much about South Africa's diverse landscape, about grasslands, wetlands, forests, and arid regions. And it's also like highlights how important the critical role played by these sustained monitoring in understanding environmental change and building resilience towards change. And the floor is now open for questions for all three speakers. Feel free to ask your question or post your question in the chat. I will read it out for the speakers. Please go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the interesting presentations and the nice mix of some known facts about SAEON and the new material. Highly appreciated. I have one question concerning the second talk about this hydrological study, and I was just wondering if SAEON, in the spirit of socio-ecological research, has been given or was capable to give an overall recommendation, because there is this clear trade-off of having higher coverage and the yield of drinking water or water at all in the runoff. And I think there are benefits to having these trees, small trees, shrubs, bushes, for example, in terms of firewood, if this is a factor. But the overall recommendation was it cut the trees and you get more water, or just leave the trees because the overall ecosystem benefits beat the decrease of available water? So that's my question.
Thank you for the question, Michael. So the overall recommendation is to continue the biennial burning to avoid the woody encroachment. A colleague of mine did work on carbon underneath the trees and in the grassland, and the carbon is actually, the soil carbon is higher in the grassland than it is under the trees. So the net trade-offs and the net benefits are actually to retain it as a biennially burnt grassland. And we have a policy brief around that, and we've made presentations to a couple of the government departments related to that.
And I have a follow-up question. Do you have pollen analysis or any long-term historical records what the natural land cover would be?
Yes, so that's actually well published. So there are long-term studies that show that the grasslands were, if I quote the dates, I'm going to get them wrong, but they've been there since as far back as the records go.
Okay, so thanks again. It was very interesting.
And Gregor mentions also the grasslands are extremely high in biodiversity.
Yeah, these are adapted fire adapted systems. So it's not a landscape where the forest is missing. It's a grassland, evolved grassland, fire adapted grassland system.
There's a question in chat to Bernard, and one of the audience members is asking, I'm interested in the contribution of termite mounds to salinity. What measurements are you taking in this regard?
Thanks for the question. So the researcher, Prof. Milton, she's done quite a bit of nutrient analysis where they take soil samples, both inside and out, and they've monitored new mounds that have started. So that's part of the fertilizer treatment they've also done, where they've added salt and nutrients. These fairy circles or these termite mounds start to develop. What is interesting with these particular termites, it doesn't form a mound that's high up. It just changes the soil. So they live in the soil and create very small mounds. It's not a big mound, so it's very different to a big termite mound. But yeah, there is some research on it. I know Johan Swanepoel, he did his PhD on these, so he studied them a bit further. So if you're interested, I can try and find those publications and research and share it with you.
Thank you, Bernard. Any questions? Any more questions from the audience? I have a question for either of the three speakers. It's truly interesting to see records dating back to 1980s, and such long-term research have been maintained throughout in South Africa. What do you see as the biggest challenge for sustaining long-term ecological research in South Africa, in your perspective?
Okay. Who wants to take that first?
Go for it.
So, I think a perpetual question is the funding. How do we maintain a funding mechanism and a funding environment that sees the value in these long-term records and keeps the institutional arrangements that keep these engagements or these operations going over the long term. I think that's partly where SAEON comes in. I think it's part of our reason of existence is to maintain these, and I think in many instances it's easier to do it in a body that belongs to the National Research Funding Organization than it would, for example, if you were a university professor or at a university relying on short-term funding cycles. So this is one way of extending this. But I think it's it does speak to a lot of these platforms have been developed with lots of blood, sweat, and tears from many people. Sometimes those are linked to those people's careers, and as they move on in their careers, they fall down. So I think it's also really important to find the right institutional arrangements to continue with these kind of long-term observation systems. I don't know if anyone else has got anything to add.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with what Gregor said. I think the finance is a big component because of the political climate. People would rather use the land for agriculture or something than to do research. So where we are fortunate to have MOUs with landowners, build relationship with stakeholders, or able to own the property, that's the cases where it's fairly easy. But to build those relationships, to get those MOUs, I think that, like Gregor said, that's where organizations like SAEON comes in, is to open the communication with the stakeholders, because a lot of them are interested in preserving nature and continuing research, but they don't have the means, they don't know who to talk to. So just in my little experience, both FTON and the Grasslands node, they have quite a good relationship with local stakeholders, and they go out talking to different people and, okay, can we do this on this property and things like that. And that's the way to start. Whether it will be able to continue long term, that's always a worry, because what happens if the person sells the land or things like that. But there's not much we can do other than have those relationships and MOUs. Yeah.
Thank you, Renat. Thank you, Gregor. And thank you, Michelle. And of course, and that's also like IATR's purpose is also the same, right? We stand together as a network of networks supporting each other. And I truly appreciate all the speakers for their wonderful talks. And if you don't have any questions from the audience, we have come to the conclusion of the webinar. Okay, so I want to say thank you again for all three speakers today. It has been wonderful to listen to all your perspectives and learn all about South African ecosystems. For the audience, please stay tuned for ILTR newsletter and all the updates from our end, and to learn more about other networks. Thank you so much all.